Welcome to Art Salon. This is the first art salon that I've ever been to where all of the artists were out on the walls, and I'm beyond thrilled. The exhibition, The Artists of Art Salon, is a wonderful show that has been living in my head for maybe the last year and a half as I began to realize how fabulous the artists were who keep coming and presenting here. An enormously diverse, interesting group of people. Some of you in the room today among them, and it finally really happened. I'm thrilled to be introducing Kerry Phillips tonight. Kerry is a very delightful and interesting artist who doesn't paint or draw or photograph. She collects things, and the things that we all live with, and very often the things that we discard. And she will go through them and assemble things and find ways to reuse them and put them together and collect them and rearrange them. Kerry has her bachelor's degree from Florida International University in Miami and her master's in art degree from the University of Arizona. Since she agreed to do this salon here, she's been accepted as one of the people who was awarded the South Florida Cultural Consortium Fellowship. And so she's got work down at FAU right now. She also has work at the Hollywood Art and Culture Center, where they have their biennial right now, and she was awarded second place, which was a very nice thing to happen. I present Kerry Phillips.
Hi, you guys. It's been a little while since I've done an artist talk, and so I'm just going to start telling you some stories, and some of them might be untrue. Because that's, the nature of memory and language, and my talk's changed a little bit because my work's changed and evolved and kind of gone off in a different direction. Not a different direction, but, it's just grown as I've grown. And so I'm going to talk about specific works, specific ideas, a lot of things, Texas, my grandma, probably my dog. So, I'm from Texas. Both my parents grew up on family farms, and they both grew up with parents that had gone through the Depression. And so a lot of my affinity for things and junk and trash kind of comes from not just them and their history, but the things that they would collect, the things they would hold on to, the stories that they would tell, the games we would play, the canning of foods, like the quilting, all these various things. And this happens to be a picture of my dad's parents' farm. And so a little later, I'm going to talk about a project that I want to do there one day, which I've kind of started in a series of performances. I sort of separate my work into there's sort of three veins. One is this thing for things, right? Like I love things, I love the thingness of things, I love, things that have been discarded, left behind, abandoned, worn out, peeling paint. Those are the kinds of things I love. And things that look like they belong somewhere else, that they were once used by someone, or like for a specific purpose that might now be outdated, and things that are in unexpected places, right? So I tend to pick stuff up a lot. Then another part of my work is these interactions. So aside from things and a little bit along with the things, I somehow found myself going into this area of almost like performance, but they were more like one-on-one performances, or like mini performance, or like performative interactions, where I was involving the public in different ways, or doing kind of like experiments not with people, that sounds creepy, but like somehow involving the public in that sort of accidental thing that happens when you relinquish control of something, when you take it outside of the studio and you just see what happens. And then another one is this kind of body of work that I'm doing right now, which is almost like inventories. And so it's culling these accidental collections that I have and combining them with things that I find on sites. So at some point, this is a little bit of an older work, because I have people are like, where are you gonna start? And I'm like, I really wanna start at the beginning, like birth, like I wanna tell you the whole story. I wanna show you all the work I've ever made, but I know that's not possible, because there's so many other things that have influenced it, and so it's like trying to figure out like what's the important thing or what's the key that then drives something else, and so it's kind of hard. So that was like really a struggle for me because, I want to tell you the story as succinctly as possible, but I want to tell you the whole story. So this was a project, it's kind of old, and at some point I realized as I was moving from studio to studio, like state to state, and then back again, that I just had a lot of shit. Can I say that here? It's my favorite word. So, and it's like, but it's stuff that like when then I started to like try to get rid of it or try to find a use for it or try to let go, I found like I couldn't almost. And, like things became really special and personal and like, oh, there's so much possibility and potential with this object that I could someday use for something else, or, I could use in an art, like twisty ties. Like how often do you just find yourself needing a twisty tie and you don't know where it is? And so I kind of, at one point, one move, I was like, okay, this is it. I need to just get rid of all this shit or, figure out a use for it. So I kind of gave myself like these art or else deadlines. So I was like, if I can figure out a way to use this box of, blah for art, then I can keep it. But if not, in a month, then I have to get rid of it. So of course, I'm super tricky with myself. I turn it all into art. So now I have to keep it. But so this, and it happened in a variety of different ways, and the titles were always like things I found, things I kept, things I'm keeping, all kinds of like things kept, keeping, having, blah. And so I love jars because my grandma canning, my dad had the, in the shop, where you screw the lid into the wood and you put screws in it. He had those. And so I've always loved jars and, the potential for holding and having. And so I just stuffed them because one of the things I happened to had kept was this bag of crocheted squares that someone at some point had given me. Because that's the problem too, once people realize that you keep stuff, they tend to give you stuff. And you tend to not say no because it's really awesome and you can use it someday. So this is another project that I was doing with the objects, and I basically took the object and I was trying to look at more closely like what made the object special. And so I was like, I wonder if you no longer saw the object, if it would still be as special, if it's like hidden. And so I crocheted around the objects and they're all together, and the viewer's invited to touch them and interact with them and see if they can't figure out what it is or if it even matters what it is. It's just that it's been kept and held on to. So my dilemma with these things, right, I also then was traveling and doing various residencies. And so it was always in the back of my head, like in grad school, like, well, if I want to do residencies, of course I do, but if I travel and go do that, what do I take with me? Do I take my 5 pounds of wax? Do I take my 2 boxes of yarn? Do I take, all this scrap wood that I've kept? Do I take, because it's like you can't just go somewhere and buy a whole new set of supplies when you use found objects or stuff that you've kept and collected. So I started to, in a sense, like challenge myself to travel somewhere with nothing and then to use what I found there. And so my first test with that was this one residency, and I failed utterly because I took a bunch of stuff, and not only that, I got a bunch of stuff there. The stuff that I got there, I had to ship back with me. And so that was my first test, and it was like, okay. I see where, my limitations are psychologically, emotionally, physically. And so then the next one, so I kept getting like a little bit better. And so then by this time, I was in France, and I took nothing. I mean, I had like an X-Acto knife, some pencils, a sharpener, things like that, things that, I probably were gonna use but didn't wanna buy again. It was cool because some places you can apply and say, I don't know what I wanna work on, I just wanna respond to the place. And some people are really into that, which is great that people encourage that and that they also like foster that. That's really amazing. And so in France, I was looking around. I didn't have a specific project, so sometimes there's a bit of boredom that goes along with that, like a crisis, of art making. Like, what am I doing? Am I wasting my time here? Or what's going on? And so you tend to, in a sense, lose faith in the process. And so it's like, okay, no, I'm just gonna stick it out. I'm gonna keep going. I'm just gonna keep finding stuff, and something magical is gonna happen. And so I don't know if it was truly magical, but I did make a lot of breakthroughs during this residency. And this isn't necessarily a picture of a breakthrough, but this is basically all the stuff that I found while I was there. And I wouldn't just pick up anything, but things that was like I was attracted to and I was interested in and that I was drawn to. And I also found, amazingly enough, like a bundle of yarn, and I started to do these weird crocheting things. And so when I left, this was in one of the shows, and when I left, this is where the real crisis comes in. The guy that ran the residency asked me, like, well, so do you want me to ship this to you when the show's over? And I said, no. And he's like, well, do we throw it away? And I was like, no. Like, why would you do that? And he's like, well, what do we, because I would have to pay for shipping, and that's France, Miami, that's really far. And I was like, well, I go, here's the deal. I go, I need you to take care of it, and I need you not to tell me what you're gonna do with it. Because I can't know that you're throwing this away, but I also can't, I know I can't keep it. Because some of this is just really, it's trash, right? I get it, it's trash. But it had become precious to me just by the bare fact that I was picking it up and spending time with it and making these cute little boxes for them to sit in. So I left France and I went to Berlin to another residency. And the very first day, like I looked down on the ground and I was like, oh, a red crayon. And I pick it up and I was like, my friend, and I was like, no, like I can't do that. I can't go through this again. Like I can't go through the trauma of like getting attached and then having to let go. And so I decided to just to acknowledge the moment, acknowledge the find with just a photograph. And so now, it's not like these evolved into like a series of works necessarily, but I have this documentation of these things that at some point I found precious. And this is my favorite. So it's like a Gerber daisy in a McDonald's cup, which I think is really funny. So I have hundreds of those, hundreds of photos of all these things that I found all around Berlin. And amongst me doing other projects and looking for materials and doing these performative interactions, I was finding these things. And it was kind of helping me figure out my relationship with things, right? And so then I came back from all these travels determined to clean out my studio. I was like, this is it. This is the time. Like, I'm really gonna do it now. And so I was going through everything and I was sorting it into boxes of like trash, like this is for sure trash. This is potentially Goodwill because it could be potentially valuable to someone else. And this is like maybe my artist friends will want it or it's trash. And then I had a show come up and I was like, what do I do? But I'd just been using all these things and sorting through them and loving them again. And so I came up with this like shadow box idea. And it kind of, like, have you ever had those shadow boxes? My sister had one, and I always loved it. Of course, I always wanted one. And, you put things in there that are precious, or mementos, or all these things. And so I decided to make a room of shadow boxes and fill them with all these things that I'd found and kept or just held on to. They were basically just junk or trash or mistakes. And so what was fun about the show, and what I realized, too, was the conversations of people in the room when they were looking at the work and talking about the work, and they would look at something and be like, oh my gosh, I had that, or I have these, or I have 10 of these, or what is this, or all these conversations. It made me start to realize maybe the possibility behind the shared experience of things, if that makes sense. So this is maybe a little side note, but these are my mom's calendars. She gave herself one every year in the stocking at Christmas time, which was not Santa Claus, it was her. So at one point I asked her, hey, do you have any of those? Because I kind of want to look at one for reference for an art piece I want to make. Like I want to make an art piece referencing these calendars. And she was like, well, I'll look. And they still live in the house that I grew up in Texas. And so she calls me back and she's like, well, I found them from 62 through 76. And then 78 through 85. And so she basically started to list these chunks of years that she found, which was basically all of them up until like 2005, except for 2. And I was like, why did you keep those? Because my mom is not a collector. She does not keep things. She hates messes. But my dad's not like that. He's opposite. And she's like, well, if I had been a quilter, I thought they really would have made a lovely quilt. And I'm like, but you're not a quilter. And she's like, no. And I'm like, so did you think at some point that you were all of a sudden going to become a quilter because she has arthritis? She's like, I don't know. And then it became like, well, why are you asking me all these questions, Kerry? I don't know. And I was like, okay. I was like, what I need you to do is send me all of those calendars right now. Because I don't know. And they're these beautiful old things. Some of them are worn out and rusty or whatever happened to them when they were in storage. And then it's just this stack, which I don't know, I find really compelling and tactile and awesome. I think that same year I went home for Christmas, which I hadn't done in a while. We drove, and I was like, oh, I need a paintbrush for something. And so I opened the junk drawer. Do all of y'all have a junk drawer? So I opened the junk drawer, and I was just like, I started to go through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, it like just brought me back to like I felt like I was in high school again or in college again, or, you know, that I lived there again, because all those same things were there. Like this ashtray. My parents don't smoke, but when my aunt and uncle came over, they would pull out this ashtray. My aunt and uncle hadn't smoked for probably 20 years at this point, but they still have this ashtray that they would pull out 20 years ago. And so I was like, I pulled everything out on the table, and they kept walking by like, what are you doing? But they know a little better than to ask now, because it's just what I do. And I started to take a picture of each item, like documenting it, and I was like, this isn't good enough. I go, Mom, don't tell Dad yet, but I need to take this back home with me. And she's like, what? And she's like, the stuff? And I go, no, the entire drawer, everything. Like, I need it. Like, I have to take it with me. And so, amazingly, they let me take it with me. The drawer? Yeah, this is the drawer and all the stuff. And my dad is just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you thinking? And then I made them a faceplate. Like, I kind of mocked up a fake drawer front, and I, folded it around foam core, and I sent it to them with instructions on how to tape it to it. And it was so convincing that I still hadn't sent them the drawer back, but I went back a couple months later to visit. And I went to the drawer, and I went like that, and I was like, oh, that's a fake drawer. Like, that's not I have the drawer. The drawer's not there anymore. What I love too about like these things that you keep and you collect and you don't let go of, because she's cleaned this drawer out in the past 30 years, but some of this stuff stays, right? And I love like these migratory habits of the things. They start out in the front and then they work their way to the back. Like it's kind of like the sea, like rolling and coming, like it moves. I think it's fascinating. And so at some point I sent the drawer back to them, and then I don't know if I had applied to like a biennial or something and I got in, so I had to call and ask my dad to send it back to me. And he's like, no. I'm like, no, what do you mean? He's like, well, don't they have thrift stores there? Like, can't you just go get a drawer? I was like, Dad, that's not the point. He's like, well, I don't get it. And I'm like, that's all right. I go, but no, I need your junk drawer, and I need you to send it. And then when he was at the post office, and they ask you what's inside, and he's like, well, it's like some paintbrushes, some paper, and like he was like literally listing off everything that was in there. And I was like, Dad, they just want to know if there's something dangerous or flammable or explosive. Like, oh, you didn't have to list everything out, which I thought was really funny. And so again, it's like you probably look up here and see stuff that you might have in your own junk drawer or your highly organized drawer. And what's funny is like my brother has a junk drawer, my sister has a junk drawer, like we all have a junk drawer, and it's all like right next to either the sink or the telephone. Or no, we have a telephone drawer and there's a junk drawer, which I think is really funny. So my fascination for things and collecting and keeping things, and my traveling and my trying to limit my accessibility to materials and just work with what I can find and have on hand has led me to this way of working that's really immediate. So it's like I would kind of come up with an idea, like an impulse or an intuition, and then instead of trying to figure it all out ahead of time, I would just try to follow through with it, right? And so that's come out in a couple different ways, and one of them is this series of fixed things where I was finding things that were broken, because you're always finding things that are broken, and then fixing them, but fixing them in a very make-do kind of haphazard fashion using what I have on hand. And so this was the first one. It's like a child's school chair, which is really beautiful. And I fixed it with duct tape because it had a little crack that would bite your butt. And they're all like really simple and like even almost comical. And I mean, hopefully, because they're fast, they're quick, they're easy. This is funny because this is my grandma's umbrella that I think I stole from her a while ago. And it had already been fixed with a piece of cellophane tape that has since like yellowed and come off. So I was like, oh, neat. I'm the second fixer. So this I actually had in my bedroom, and this is exactly what I had done to it, because I didn't, every time I went to Home Depot, I never thought to buy the wheel for it. And so then I started to do these installations of fixed chairs, like chairs that I would just find and fix. And I don't just pick up, anything. It has to it meets some like inexplicable quality in my head that I can't describe. Like wicker, I'm pretty sure I would never pick up. So can any of y'all imagine any problems that might arise from projects like this? Exactly, storage. So here I am trying to like get rid of everything, and then now like, oh, I've just turned all these pieces into like art, and I love them because I fix them and I use them, and so then I would like give them away. Like I would try to find them homes. So it's kind of like a foster care program. So that's how I started to think of finding objects. Was like, oh, so I'm not finding and keeping. I'm finding, I'm nurturing, and then I'm letting go. So it's like foster care. So I'd find them good homes. Some of them I would keep. Some of them I still have just because I really like them. So I was also starting to think of these like accidental collections that I would have. And so one of those is I had this old phone, and I noticed one day that I had every single text message that I had ever had on this phone. Like, so from the first time I sent a text message, it was still on this phone. And I started looking through them, and I was like getting really oddly nostalgic. And I was like, these are text messages. These are disposable conversations that don't mean anything. They're not any complete sentences. They're not spelled right. And so I was just fascinated. And then, of course, I couldn't throw them away. So then I was learning hand calligraphy and drawing out each text message. And so these are text messages that I received. And so it's not like I intentionally collected them, but they're these accidental kind of things that I've kept. And what I like about these too is that it's like LOL. It's like we could probably look at each other's phone and see like the similar conversations or snippets of ideas or questions being asked and misspelled. And so this one, it's in the DuPont building downtown in Miami. I picked it because I thought it was funny because everything is spelled wrong, but it's like you still get it even though it's spelled wrong. So another project that was like me following my intuition was this series of tents I was building in people's houses. And so how many of y'all used to build tents out of, in your living room and stuff? So I've always wanted to, because that kind of, to me, encapsulates this way of make-do, and problem solving that we have as kids, right? Creative problem solving, because you use what you have on hand, you use heavy books, you put it under the furniture, you pin it to a wall, like you do whatever you can to make this structure for, play to happen or whatever. But I've always wanted to use that for a show, but a gallery space is just this big empty place, right? There's nothing already there. There's no kind of context, if you will, right? And so these kinds of constructions rely on there being things to use, things around. And so I was like, well, how can I play around with this idea? And I was like, well, I'll ask for volunteers. And so everywhere I go, I ask people if I can build a sheet tent or whatever in their space. And it's really a lot of fun. Like it's fun. It's fun. Like who will let me do it? Like strangers have let me do it. They've let me in their apartment all by myself with them not even there. And like in Berlin, this one lady got confused and she thought I was coming to play with her kids. So her kids were actually there helping me. And at one point I said, Scheisse, just because I say shit and like I love Scheisse, like it's a really lovely word, but they're German and they speak German, so they knew what that, and I was like, shit, sorry. And here it's like this dog is like, nope, I'm not leaving. I'm just gonna stay right here while you're working on that. So I've done them like in Texas and California and Poland and Miami and France. So it's really, I don't know, it's fun. And so like this is just kind of like this ongoing project that I hope to always be doing. And so this almost is like a mini performative action, right? But it's only for this couple of people that happen to be there. So it's also it's like really intimate and personal, and they have experiences with these materials that I don't have, like the sheets and the books and the whatever that might be around. And the gun. Yeah, and the gun in this case. I think it's just a decorative gun. So another one of these like intuition sort of ideas was I was writing a series of crush letters, like letters to people that I used to have crushes on or had crushes on. And so it's written in masking tape on the wall. And so I kind of do these, you know, whenever I have a crush or like whenever I have a wall. It's funny because I feel like I haven't had any crushes lately, so there's not been any lately, and I was like, that's really sad. And so this is like a guy in 7th grade that I used to have a crush on. And so they're supposed to be like transparent and funny and like me just sort of being vulnerable because like I would never go up and tell someone that I had a crush on them. But maybe this helped me become a little more willing to do that. So this one was in a bar. There was like a whole series like of this like performance festival in Poland. So it's fun that I was doing these. Some of them I've done just like where no one's watching except the UPS driver that happens to drive by or, you know, whatever. And then some of them are actually like in front of people. He was adorable. And then some of the people I have crushes on, like I just met, like this guy at the coffee shop. Like I don't even know if I interacted with him, but I immediately like had this affinity for him that I couldn't explain. So that's also kind of an ongoing project, but like currently and there's more of them too, but I only have an hour. Okay. But yeah, I guess once I have another crush again, I'll keep doing them. And so that was interesting because I was at a residency in Vermont doing that one, and it was snowing. It was in January, and so I wanted to do this crush letter, but I wanted to do it in the snow, and I was like, but how can I write it in the snow without having all my footprints around it? And so I was trying to devise this really complicated way of, you know, building something that I could write along with, and all these really complicated, contrived, convoluted things for me to solve this problem. And then I looked at my desk and I was like, masking tape. I was like, I'm just gonna write it on the wall, like how simple. And then that ended up being the solution. And so a lot of times the way I work is kind of about creative problem solving, right? Like I have this thing that I wanna do, but how can I solve this problem? And what's the easiest, not easiest because it's easy, but what's the most like natural solution for me and not convoluted and, you know, contrived or whatever. And so this was also in France, and I was trying to find materials and figure out what a project I wanted to work on, but I also wanted to learn French. Like I wanted to become fluent in French, right? But what I was finding when I got there was that it was really hard to converse with the locals. Like I was feeling really intimidated and, you know, nervous and unsure of myself. And I've had experiences like year before in France where like I'd call and ask the guy for a room at his motel and he would hang up on me. Like it happened 3 times because I wasn't quick enough at getting out the French phrase that he was just like, I don't even have time for this. And so I think I was feeling like a little, you know, intimidated. But then I saw the lady from the bread shop just walking around like, bonjour, bonjour, bonjour. Like, and she was just so confident, and I was like, it's because she has a job. Like she has a role here, she has a job. So I was like, okay, I need a job. No one would give me a job, probably because I wouldn't talk to them. But I was like, my job is to learn French, right? That's my job, that's my goal. So I was like, okay, so it gives you it gives you a reason, right? Like a purpose. And once you have that, you can kind of do anything. You can make a fool out of yourself, like you can do whatever, because you have this goal that you have to meet. And so my job was to learn French. So everyone that I kind of came into contact with or met or anything, I would ask them like, excuse me, hey, I'm learning, I would say it in French, like I'm learning French. Could you give me a phrase, like in French? And they're just like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, cool, blah, blah, blah. And so then it would spark on these like amazing conversations. But had I not had that job, that thing to focus on, like I never probably would have opened my mouth. And so this got me thinking about, you know, the interactions with the public and these kinds of like mini performances in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. So that was really exciting. And then oh, sorry. I'm like looking in the background. So that's what I was doing with the yarn. I was crocheting shit. So these are all the phrases that I collected in the background. So along with this idea of performances, like I'd come back to do some shows, or I was finally back. But so always in the back of my head has been this, not always, but like for several years now, has been this idea of this farms project that I want to do on the farm that my dad grew up on. Because no one lives there, it's been abandoned for like a really long time. it's like up for sale, but it's in a part of Texas that no one really wants to live in. Like, it's not like it's great farming land, it's not great ranching land, and like, it's just not, it's an awful town. I mean, it's just kind of like, and maybe it's because, you know, in high school, it's like, there's no movie theater, there's no radio station on FM, like there was just nothing. And like, people would have wedding showers in the Dairy Queen, like that's how small the town is. And that was the nearest big town, like that's not even where this farm is. But, so it's like this farm's abandoned, and no one's lived there for years, and I didn't really know the side of the family that well, but so this idea of all that potential, right, for like creating story around this place, around these people that I didn't really know that well, with all this junk that's still there, like kind of culling like the property of the house for materials to make site-specific installations or constructions or, you know, narratives, all kinds of stuff. So I want to like go there and spend like months there or a year or however long, like live there and invite people to come out and help me make, help me do, help me make, help me find, help me see, like all these different things. So I'm super excited about this project that hasn't happened yet because I need a little bit of funding. But I was like, well, how can I start this project now? Like I don't need money to start it now. I don't even have to be there to start it now. I'm gonna start giving walking tours, right? And so various shows I have, I'll give a Texas farm walking tour, and we'll start in the parking lot or wherever. We'll start on the site, and then I'll walk them around the farm, and I'll point out different areas and aspects and different anecdotes and stories. And so they're a lot of fun because there's no visuals, there's nothing there. I'm just pointing out into the expanse, but I'm talking about the barn or the yard or the rattlesnakes or, you know, whatever. And so they're quite fun because people really get into it. And they always tell me afterwards that they like really saw it, they really got a sense of it. And so on the tour, like I guide the tour as if we're there and I've started the project, right? So I say, like, feel free to look around the buildings, feel free to pick stuff up, to look at it. Please just don't take anything and be really, really careful, you know, things like that. And so it's just, I don't know, it's a lot of fun, especially if people have been drinking. And so then at the end of the tour, I'll take a picture and I'll superimpose it on these pictures of the farm. And hypothetically, I'll send them to them, but sometimes I forget to do stuff like that. So we're all there in Texas. This was a couple years ago at Pulse Art Fair. Y'all have all been to an art fair, right? It's kind of like a crazy mall. Like just lots of people and lots of interaction and stuff. And usually the gallery person doesn't interact with you. You just kind of look at the work and keep moving. And so I was invited to do a booth with the Girls Club for one of the fairs. And I was trying to think about what I wanted to do because I wanted to take advantage of the fact that all these people would be coming through, like coming in and out, and then also do something about this idea of value of things and storytelling kind of thing. And so what I've been thinking about a lot is how things have value, right? And I've met so many people that they're like, I'm not at all a collector. Because people will call me the H word, hoarder. I'm not a hoarder, I'm an artist, no. But I'm not a hoarder. I'm not a hoarder. I swear, I'm not a hoarder, no. But like, even people that are super organized and they don't keep things, they don't collect things, they don't even recycle, that's just how much they don't even keep things. Like they still have those things that they do keep that do become precious to them that aren't precious or valuable to anyone else, right? And so it's kind of something that all of us do. Like, I don't know if it's like human condition kind of thing or if I could say it's universal, but I might. But so I was trying to figure out what it was that could make my valuable thing valuable to you or your valuable thing valuable to me. And I started to realize that it was this idea of the story and the shared story. And so I became really interested in that story and making a space where people could hear my story about the object, but then also share their story about their object. And so I started out with 7 objects on the wall. Those aren't the ones I started out with. I invited people to come in and to pick an object and to trade an object with me, something that they had with them or they brought with them. Because usually a lot of people might have something in their bag that they've held on to, or maybe they're wearing it, or their wedding ring. No, I'm kidding. So when someone would pick an object and they would find an object, I would share with them the story of the object and why it was valuable. And then they would share the story of their object and why it was valuable, and we would swap. And so then when the next person came along, I would explain to them why this object was valuable to the person that had just given it to me. And it would just keep continuing like that. And so it was really a lot of fun. And so I was also recording the interactions, like the stories. And so people could go back and listen to them later. And I was making lists of all the different exchanges. And so it was really a lot of fun and really amazing at how people would want like the dumbest things, like the lid from a Tostitos can, but it was because they knew what the story was. And I've seen so many people since then that have said that they've kept the object or they still have the object because they know the story and because it's now this valuable thing to them too. Even though it wasn't their experience, it wasn't their story. So that was a lot of fun. Around the same time, I also was doing these, the inventories kind of started. And it started sort of by accident because I had an opportunity to use this space that was going to be empty for only a month at this other like art project space in Miami. And so I was like, oh, cool. They invited me to come do whatever I wanted. And it was going to be there for a month and fantastic. So I brought all this stuff. I had this huge like thing planned I was going to draw on the wall with all these objects. And it was going to be like a map and tell a story and do super, super huge. So I got there with all my stuff, my car full, and she was like, okay, bad news. Well, maybe not bad news. She's like, the show's only gonna be up for a week, the space rented. And I was like, what? Like, okay, so I can't do what I had planned to do, because that's just, it's way too much amount of work for me just to have to come back and repaint everything in a week. I can't even come back in a week. And so I had already had like this one sculpture plan in the background, because it's a stack of sheets. And so that was already done, and it was there, and I was ready. But then I was kind of looking around, like I pulled some of my materials out, and I sat down, and I just sort of started to imagine and think about what I wanted to do. Like, what can I do with all this stuff that I have at my disposal right now? Like today, it has to be done today. And so like these, in the front here, these are shelves that were stacked against the wall. And so, they came together, and they became this sculptural, like, pedestal almost. And then I found this concrete block on the outside. And so the extension cords were going to be a part of my line drawing. But instead, I turned it into this. And so it was a lot of fun, kind of this challenge of like having to problem solve the same materials, but into a different type of work, but in that limited amount of time. And I was really excited with how it turned out. And so then it started to become almost like the way that I started working. And so these happen to be all the extension cords from my studio. Because I don't know about you, whenever I need an extension cord, I can never find it, or I forget to bring it, so I have to go buy another one. And then this lamp is like a lamp from my grandma's house that I had just gotten kind of like a couple months before from my aunt. And so I also too tend to reuse materials a lot. So you'll see in a few slides, I've used the lamp for now a different piece. And so this is a sheet in a different location, but just a better picture. And so it's a stack of sheets folded and just stacked up. And I usually invite people to hug it because it's a lot of fun. It's like a cat scratch for people. It's sort of, yeah. And so then this project was another inventory where I was like, okay, I'm going to use all the yarn from my space, because I was a fiber artist grad student, so I have a lot of yarn. And I don't know if you've ever done any kind of yarn stuff. You don't throw it away. Like, you keep it, because you're going to use it again, you're going to fix it, you're going to make a pom-pom, you're going to do something. You're going to get a whim to crochet a hat in 80-degree weather. So I knew that I was going to use all my yarn, and then I started to look around the ArtCenter for other things that they might have that I could use. So I found this table, I found these pieces of wood, and I found this, the concrete block. I don't know if I actually found it, because they had it in the parking lot, like it was there. So I don't know if that counts. But and then this is kind of how I resolved that problem. And so I didn't resolve this problem in 2 days. Like, I did it a little longer and more intentional. But this is how I did that. And so all of the yarn, you can probably tell, it comes through the crack and then it's taped to the floor. So I was like, this is really fun. I like doing it this way. Because after the show's over, after the project, I just give them back their materials and I keep my materials and everyone's happy, no one's hurt. I don't have any more objects in my studio. So this is kind of a similar project where I went with a few found objects. They're on the wall hanging, and some bungee cords from the top. And then they had this hopper full of wood, like scrap wood. And so I used all of that, and this bench turned upside down, and I found a way that I wanted to put it all together. And this is a similar project. So all these are now kind of these inventory projects. And so this was at a old design store in the Design District in Miami. And they had this closet full of drawers. And I was like, oh, okay. I called dibs on the drawers. And so I pulled out all the drawers and I put them all together and made this huge thing. And then that's all the tape from my studio. Because I have a lot of tape too. Because remember the crush letters? Like I really like tape. Because it's so fun. Like so many things you can do with tape. And then I also found this piece of carpet in there. And because for me, art's like playful, it's creative problem solving, and it's really a lot of fun. Like even though a lot of this stuff is really personal, I feel like it's also, in a sense, universal. You know, like the objects, right? Like there's some point of entry, right, where everybody can relate a little bit, maybe, to something. And then this is another inventory project with all the cushions from my studio. And then these found like pieces of wood. This is all the like leftover, I use all the yarn on a different piece, but this is all the leftover scrap yarn. So again, I don't know if you've ever done any weaving or fiber stuff, but I kept all the leftovers because I was doing tapestries. So it's like, you know, even the littlest piece of yarn could be what you need. And so I had this like bag of yarn that had been knotted up over years and years and years. And so I spent like 4 hours unknotting it all because I'm like a cat. I love unknotting yarn. And then the tabletop I found on site. This is all a string from my studio, combined with some different things. This is the lamp in its permanent home on a piece of drywall. This was a project, so I traveled to Ohio, I was invited to do a show there. And then it happened to be that there was a fibers professor that had just moved, and she had all of her yarn in boxes, and so she was kind enough to let me borrow it. So I literally didn't bring anything. And I found everything there. Like a lot of this stuff I found in her garage because they had just moved. Like this table. This table was actually left behind by the previous people that owned their house. And so they were gonna throw it away. And I was like, this is an amazing table. Can I borrow it? Can I use it? And so I pulled it out and I used it for this exhibition. And it turns out that they kept the table. Because they were just like, wow, this is really a cool table. Like, huh. And so it's just all stuff. I was there for a week. Maybe in like between 7 and 10 days. And so it's like I just spent some time there hanging out with some friends, and I spent some time looking for materials, and then I spent some time making the work. So it was fun. And then this is like all these leftover pieces of wood that I kept, or that I find and keep because they're the way they've worn away, or is really beautiful to me. And so I turned them into these corners. This is from the same show with these lamps hanging upside down. And so they're hanging from their cords and just barely touching the floor. I tend to not like light because I get migraines. And so the fact that I even wanted to use a lamp or a light, and I don't think lamps are particularly pretty. And for sure these aren't pretty. But somehow when you get a whole group of them together, like they definitely have character, right? Like they're these kind of ugly objects that someone spent a really long time designing, and at one point they were probably really beautiful and valuable, but now they're just these kind of things. But together somehow, it's like they formed a union and they're special again. And so at the show at FAU, the Consortium show, this is the piece I did also with lamps there, and it's under a stairwell, because I like funny spaces, right? And so there's this funny space in the hallway in front of the gallery there, under the stairwell, and it's just totally like this useless space, but there's a lot of it there, and so I was like, I just imagine it filled with lamps. And I did it. And so this is just, because you might be wondering how they're attached. So they're attached to like this weird frame back there. Because it's like trying to imagine like stacking bowling pins. It's really hard. Like they just want to blah, blah. And then this is a wall piece that I did there. And so it's all the tabletops from my studio. So I just moved to this awesome new LiveWorks studio. And I had it set up. I had my little kitchen set up. I had my studio set up. I had my coffee table that I had set up. And now I have nothing. Like I have no tables. I have no surfaces. So it's like all the cushions from my studio, from my house/studio, all the tabletops, various other items, all the extension cords again. That's what the lines are. A lone fluorescent bulb. And then what's also fun is they let me in their surplus area, So I got to pull stuff from FAU's surplus area. And then they also let me in their prop room from their theater department, which is amazing. And I don't know why I was never in theater, because like I walked into that room and I was like, oh my God, it's like I'm home. Like, this is amazing. And so they let me use some of their cushions and tables and stuff. So it's this giant wall of shit. And this line drawing of extension cords. I mean, there's other stuff I could show, but I feel like I did it. I'm just kidding.